Hi, we're live at the Javits Center. Welcome back to the Nest Summit. I am joined today by Governor Bredesen, the former Tennessee governor and chairman of the board and president of Clearloop Corporation. We spent a lot of time over the past few days talking about how climate change is affecting the country through climate risk, but we haven't had enough talk about initiatives that are actually trying to do good. And I'm hoping the governor can bring us some rays of light and tell us about the good work that he's doing with Clearloop. Welcome, Governor.
Thank you. Appreciate being here.
So give us an insight into why you started Clearloop, what was the initiative for it, and some of the great work that you're doing.
Yeah, I think the idea was that, first of all, the electrical grid is far and away the lowest hanging fruit when it comes to really getting serious at scale kinds of carbon reductions in the short term. The technology is there. It's a quarter of all emissions in the United States today, over that. And so finding new ways beyond just PPAs and the kind of classical things to enable companies who want to step up and do their, and do their part, finding new ways for them to do this was kind of the idea. Things like PPAs have been around a while. They've been successful for a relatively small number of big companies who have the ability to commit to 15 and 20-year contracts, who have the credit ratings and so on to be able to use those to generate power sources. But there are thousands and thousands of other companies who want to do the right thing. They want to be helpful, but a PPA is not going to work. And what we've tried to do is find a way to reach out to those companies and give them an alternative to this kind of classic way of doing it. And there seems to be a lot of interest in that, that even some pretty good-sized companies are just nervous with this idea of 15 and 20-year kinds of commitments. They'd like to do something which is a little more transactional, a little more, get some benefit from it right now and have the costs right now.
So do you think this is a way for us to actually reach scale around renewable energy?
I think it's one of the ways. I mean, the opportunity is so enormous that no one thing is going to do it. Solar in the United States is, I guess last year was 1.5% of generation or something, and it can go well above that, and it's growing. But anything we can do to accelerate that, I think, is very helpful. I think it's important to remember that that 25%. I mean, that represents more carbon than all of the cars and trucks and all of the airplanes and all of the buses and all of the trains and everything else generated in this country. And the technology is there. It's economical. It's there. It's low hanging fruit and something we ought to be really going after if what we really want to do is to cut down on greenhouse gases and do it in the quickest and most economical way possible.
As a former governor, what are your involvement around policy change in the United States to try to get us into a world where more adoption of solar is actually being pushed, not just from a business fundamental, but also from a policy regulation format?
That's not an area I've been particularly involved in. I mean, that is a very there's a lot of people doing that. To be honest, I'm a little skeptical in this country. It may be just some of my history, I guess, about how effective that's going to be in the politics of this country today. I mean, unfortunately, we've all, from all sides of this issue, let greenhouse gas emissions and global warming become this highly politicized issue. And my fear always about anything which is done, right from a regulatory standpoint or legislatively sort of over the dead bodies of half the country, it just doesn't have any staying power. It'll end up like Obamacare has ended up, which is, it's not owned by everyone in the country. It's become very politicized, and one half of the country is trying to figure out ways to undo it. And I don't want that to happen to climate change initiatives. They're too important.
So with solar being one of the solutions, can you talk to us about some of the obstacles and ways that you think we can overcome it? Or is battery still a big issue? And how will that maybe change the future of solar in this country?
Yeah, I mean, I think that to really take it as far as it can go, you really need obviously changes and improvements in battery technologies and really the economics batteries. It's getting to the point where it's reasonable under some circumstances, but it does drive the cost up, substantially of solar, but it's going to be necessary. If there were a place that our country were investing federal dollars in research, I would say you couldn't do much better than batteries when it comes to climate change, because that would transform that. But there's still a huge scope for solar and for wind, for that matter. It just as a guess or as a rough estimate, the normal grid can take about 30% of that intermittent, non-dispatched renewable power. That's about where California is at, a little higher than that actually, is where Germany is at. We're way, way, way below that. So there still is a lot of scope to be moving the country up to those kinds of numbers, where then battery storage starts to become important to take it beyond that. There's been a lot of progress in a few places. I mean, California is the obvious one, but in vast swaths of the country, I mean, it's just not happening. I mean, I'm talking to you from New York State at the moment, and New York State is a huge industrial state with huge power demands. It's a fraction of a percent of their power is coming out of solar. There's a lot of scope in a lot of big industrial states like New York and New Jersey and the like to be addressing and putting more of this kind of renewable energy into the mix, with all the greenhouse gas improvements that implies.
Governor, what are some of the tailwinds that are helping you, though? Obviously, we're looking at a world where physical climate risk is much more obvious today than it might have been 10 years ago. We also have price of solar going down. Are there other tailwinds that are helping support this initiative?
I think the big story in this country, you asked about regulatory change. I think the big story in the United States is the extent to which the corporate sector has stepped up to really trying to address this issue. I mean, they are who is driving it in our country right now. You've got the big tech companies that are big power users that are spending enormous amounts of money and attention to trying to do their part to do that. There's a lot of companies that have commitments. They're just classical, regular Fortune 500 companies that have commitments to try to reduce greenhouse gases. I think, the challenge for all of us, who are doing things like being at this summit, is to find some new and good and innovative ways of doing this, different financing mechanisms and some tools that they can use. Now, most of these companies, they're not in a position to, hire a team of experts to help them work through these things. So they need some help from all of us who care about this issue in the NGO world, in some of the corporate world, like I'm trying to do with ClearLoop. We have a lot we can contribute.
Governor, are you trying to raise capital out in the marketplace, or is this more of a private initiative?
No, so far it's been a private initiative, and I'm fortunate to be able to to push ahead with these kinds of things. Like anything, as it gets to scale, there will come a time when that has to happen. I started another solar company with two other people back about 8 or 9 years ago now, called Silicon Ranch, which does the classical PPA kind of thing and builds big utility scale solar facilities. And we've gone through several outside capital raising rounds with that. So you have to do it at some point, but so far not.
When we talk about solar and the transition, we had on the former governor of Colorado this week as well, and we talked a lot about utility board that he's working on about moving towards net zero. You talked about corporate interest. Is there more and more interest from utilities just in trying to move their electrical grid?
Yeah, I think it varies, just like utilities vary. There are some that have very little interest, and there's others that have a lot of interest. I think it tends to be driven by where they have customers who've got that interest. So they tend to be, certainly here in the Tennessee Valley, where TVA is the provider. They're responding to demands from and needs from corporate customers who want to start using green energy, and they want a vehicle to do it with. So it's happening. And remember also that in a lot of the country, in fact, in most of the geography of the country, it's these cooperatives that are really the providers of the power rather than the big municipal utilities like in the big cities. They too are playing a real role in this and trying to find ways to procure renewable power that they can provide to their customers who want precisely that. So there's a lot of pressure coming on that, but I really think it's important that it has been the businesses, the corporations and the companies creating the demand and saying that they want to be a player in this fighting global warming that is driving all of this. It's their request to the utilities and the cooperatives and places like Clearloop that are driving this, and that's good news.
The trend on obviously solar has been for it to reduce in cost over the last few years, way more than I think people initially expected. But I remember Ray Kurzweil predicted that I think by 2039 solar energy would actually be free. The only problem would be storage. Do you see the trend continuing to go down in pricing?
It's going to slow down because remember that the silicon panels, they have been going down steadily in price, which happens, it's happened with everything silicon out there in the world, from the computer chips to everything else. But you're at the point now when you build a solar array that easily half the cost of it is in the land and the steel and the concrete that goes to support those things, and that stuff is not coming down. So there's a portion of it, the silicon part, which I think will still continue to slide down, but it's starting to hit to the point where that's becoming a less and less important part of the total cost of a solar array. So no, I don't think it'll ever be free. I can remember back when nuclear power was being talked about a long time ago, everybody thought that was free power, and it turned out to be anything but. But it is very attractive. I mean, it's a very low maintenance. Solar is it's also very low impact. It doesn't have the visual impact that wind turbines do, it should be a real player. It's not crazy to think 50 years from now that you could have essentially a carbon-free electrical generation process. It would take some technology improvements with things like batteries, but I can't think of any other sector of the economy where you could say that with any clear path to getting from here to there that you do with the electrical generation and the renewable power. And that's why it's so important to focus on it.
Are you seeing battery technology start to catch up, or at least the research and money go into it at a greater scale?
Yeah, it's starting to, and you're starting to see companies that that used to be doing just solar arrays now talking about wanting some storage to go along with it. Maybe 25% of the capacity for an hour or two, those kinds of things. They're trying to get some experience with it, and like anything, ramping production up will help to bring costs down, just as it did with the solar panels. But it's still, still problematical. I mean, it doubles or triples the cost of electricity out of solar, and that's the difference between it being a very low cost and a relatively high cost form of power.
Governor, you're reaching millions of people during Climate Week. Is there anything that people could be doing to help in this progress?
Yeah, I think, I've been fascinated by the extent to which corporate America has really picked up the ball here in a way that our government has not. And I just think that we need to be finding ways of helping them to do these things. There's no source of innovation that I think has been any more spectacular than the internet, to give an example. And when it got started, I mean, Tim Berners-Lee put together a very simple approach, very simple protocol that made the World Wide Web possible. He didn't anticipate Amazon or Facebook or Twitter or any of those kinds of things. He gave corporations a simple tool, and then they took it and led with it into all sorts of areas. I think that's the kind of thing we need to do, that rather than trying to find more regulations or more NGOs that find more ways to try to keep companies from cheating in some way and putting these, huge kind kind of regulatory schemes together, give them some simple rules and let them take it forward, and let the innovation that we have in this country help them to figure out all the different ways in which they could be reducing their greenhouse gas usages. Asking a bunch of very smart people out there in this, in the world who really want to do something about this, and trying to help them with, giving them some tools and some freedom to act and use their creativity and innovation, I think is the answer to this problem.
Governor, I want to thank you so much for joining Climate Week at the Javits Center for the Nest Summit. It was a pleasure to speak with you today.
It would likewise appreciate it very much, and looking forward to hearing what everyone has to say this week.
Thank you, Governor.